Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The old grandfather clock in the hallway had just chimed midnight, each stroke echoing through the quiet house like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. I was curled up on the sofa, a half-finished book of poetry resting on my lap, the words blurring slightly as sleep tugged at the edges of my consciousness. Outside, a soft rain had begun to fall, whispering against the window panes of my little cottage here in Willow Creek. It's the kind of rain that usually lulls me right to sleep, a comforting, familiar sound in the Oregon countryside. My name is Eleanor, by the way, and most nights are just like this. Peaceful, predictable. Or at least they were. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not a loud, demanding bang, but a hesitant, almost shy tapping at the front door. My heart gave a little jump. Midnight visitors weren't exactly common out here. My nearest neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was a good quarter-mile down the road, and he was well into his 80s, not prone to late-night excursions. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined it, maybe the wind playing tricks with the old oak tree branches that scraped against the siding sometimes. But then it came again, a little more insistent this time, but still gentle. I set my book aside, my earlier drowsiness vanishing completely, replaced by a prickle of unease mixed with curiosity. Who on earth could it be at this hour? I padded softly across the worn wooden floor, the cool boards a familiar comfort under my bare feet. Reaching the door, I hesitated, peering through the small peephole. The porch light, which I always leave on, cast a warm, yellow glow over the figure standing there. But the rain, now coming down a bit harder, distorted the image. It was a man, that much I could see, silhouetted against the glistening darkness. He seemed to be hunched slightly against the drizzle. Taking a shallow breath, I called out, my voice a little shaky. "Who is it?" It's Arthur. Arthur Jenkins from the old Miller place. Down the lane." His voice was deep, and there was a tremor in it, something I couldn't quite place. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of questions. Arthur Jenkins. He'd moved into the Miller place about 6 months ago. It had been empty for years before that. I'd seen him a few times, mostly from a distance, working in the overgrown yard or getting his mail. He was a quiet man, kept to himself. We'd exchanged polite nods, a brief hello once at the local grocery store, but that was the extent of our interactions. He wasn't what you'd call a social butterfly, and frankly, neither was I, not anymore. "Mr. Jenkins?" I said, unlocking the deadbolt and turning the doorknob. "Is everything all right?" As I opened the door, the scent of damp earth and rain filled the entryway. Arthur stood there, looking a little lost. He was probably in his late 50s, I guessed, with salt and pepper hair plastered to his forehead by the rain. His shoulders were slumped, and he clutched an old, misshapen felt hat in his hands, turning the brim over and over. His face, illuminated by the porch light, looked pale and drawn, and his eyes, there was a deep sadness in them, a vulnerability that startled me. He wasn't making eye contact, instead focusing on some point just past my shoulder. I'm so terribly sorry to bother you this late, missus." He trailed off, clearly not remembering my name. "Eleanor. Eleanor Vance," I supplied gently. "Please, don't worry about the hour. You look soaked. Come in, come in." I stepped back, holding the door wider. He hesitated for another moment, as if unsure he should accept, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and stepped inside, bringing with him the cool night air and the faint smell of wet wool from his coat. He wiped his feet meticulously on the mat, a small gesture of consideration that didn't go unnoticed. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice still low and uncertain. He stood rather awkwardly in the small hallway, dripping slightly onto the rug. He looked like a man carrying a heavy burden, and for some reason my initial apprehension was replaced by a sudden, strong urge to offer some comfort, though I had no idea what was wrong. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the background, measuring out the silence that stretched between us, a silence that felt thick with unspoken words. I found myself wondering what could possibly have brought this solitary man to my doorstep in the middle of a rainy night. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a night that would gently unravel everything I thought I knew about connection, about the quiet lives we lead, and the surprising depths hidden just beneath the surface. "Let me take your coat," I offered, trying to sound as welcoming as possible. "You must be freezing." He allowed me to help him out of the damp garment, his movements stiff. Underneath, he wore a simple, dark sweater. He was thinner than I'd realized from a distance. "Why don't you come into the living room? I still have the fire going. You can warm up." He followed me, his gaze sweeping briefly around the cozy space, the worn armchairs, the overflowing bookshelves, the flickering embers in the hearth. It was my sanctuary, filled with the comfortable clutter of a life lived, perhaps, a little too much in solitude lately. He didn't say anything, just moved towards the fireplace, extending his hands towards the fading warmth. The silence returned, but it felt different now that he was inside. It was less about unease and more about a kind of shared, uncertain anticipation. I had a feeling this wasn't just a casual visit, or a simple request for a cup of sugar. Something significant had happened, or was about to. "Can I get you something?" I asked. "A cup of tea? Coffee? Or perhaps something a little stronger, given the hour and the weather?" I tried a small smile, hoping to ease whatever tension he was feeling. He finally looked at me then, a direct gaze that was surprisingly intense, yet still tinged with that deep well of sadness. Tea would be very nice, Eleanor," he said, my name sounding a little less foreign on his lips this time. "Thank you. I apologize again. I wouldn't have disturbed you, but—" he gestured vaguely, a helpless movement of his hand. "I didn't know where else to go." Those last words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Didn't know where else to go. For a reclusive man like Arthur Jenkins, that spoke volumes. I nodded, my own curiosity now thoroughly mixed with a growing sense of empathy. "The kettle won't take a minute," I said. "You just sit there and get warm." As I headed towards the kitchen, the rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming against the roof, as if underscoring the unexpected turn the night had taken. I couldn't shake the feeling that the ordinary rhythm of my life was about to change, all because my neighbor knocked late at night. In the kitchen, as I filled the kettle, my mind raced. What could be so urgent, so troubling, that it would drive a man like Arthur Jenkins out into a storm and onto the doorstep of a neighbor he barely knew? All sorts of scenarios flickered through my thoughts: a medical emergency, a break-in, some terrible news. Each one seemed plausible, yet none quite fit the quiet desperation I'd seen in his eyes. The water began to heat, its low rumble a counterpoint to the rain, and the distant, mournful hoot of an owl I sometimes heard in the woods behind my house. I took down 2 mugs, my favorite ones, a cheerful yellow for me and a calming blue for him. I found the box of chamomile tea, hoping its soothing properties might help whatever was ailing him. When I returned to the living room, tea tray in hand, Arthur was still standing by the fireplace, though he turned to look out the window at the rain-streaked darkness. He seemed lost in thought, his reflection a faint, ghostly image on the glass. The fire had dwindled further, casting long, dancing shadows that made the room feel both intimate and a little mysterious. I placed the tray on the old wooden coffee table. "Here we are," I said gently. "Help yourself to sugar, if you like." He turned from the window, a sigh escaping him that seemed to carry more than just weariness. "Thank you, Eleanor. You're very kind." He sat down in the armchair opposite mine, the one my late husband, Tom, always used to favor. For a fleeting moment, a pang of old grief tightened my chest, but I pushed it away. Tonight wasn't about my ghosts. Arthur picked up the blue mug, his hands trembling slightly as he cradled it. He didn't add any sugar. We sat in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the clinking of his mug against the saucer, the sighing of the wind outside, and the crackle of a log I'd added to the fire before bringing in the tea. The warmth was slowly returning to the room, a comforting blanket against the chill of the night and the unknown reason for his visit. I waited, letting him gather his thoughts. I sensed that whatever he had to say would take courage. Finally he spoke, his voice still low, but clearer now, steadier. It's my dog, Bess," he said, his gaze dropping to the swirling tea in his mug. "She's gone." My heart sank. For many people, especially those who live alone, a pet is not just an animal. It's family. It's a constant companion, a furry confidant. "Oh, Arthur, I'm so sorry," I said softly. "Gone? You mean she ran off?" He shook his head, a single slow movement. He looked up at me, and this time the rawness in his eyes was unmistakable. There were tears welling there, threatening to spill. "No, not ran off." He paused, swallowing hard. The effort it took him to speak was palpable. She passed away. About an hour ago, right there in my arms." His voice cracked on the last few words, and a tear finally escaped, tracing a path down his weathered cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. The admission, so simple, so devastating, filled the small living room with a profound sense of loss. And suddenly, his late-night visit, his distress, his earlier comment about not knowing where else to go, it all made a heartbreaking kind of sense. He hadn't wanted to be alone with his grief. My own eyes welled up in sympathy. I knew that kind of pain, the sudden gaping hole left by a beloved companion. After Tom died, our old golden retriever, Gus, had been my shadow, my comfort. Losing him a few years later had felt like losing Tom all over again in some ways. "Oh, Arthur," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I am so terribly sorry. That's just devastating." I reached out, instinctively, and placed my hand gently on his forearm. He flinched almost imperceptibly at the contact, then seemed to relax into it, his own hand still clutching the warm mug. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment, another tear falling. The silence that followed was different again. It was no longer awkward or uncertain. It was a silence of shared understanding, of empathy. The storm outside raged on, but inside my little cottage, a different kind of atmosphere was settling in, one of quiet compassion. I just sat there, my hand on his arm, offering what little comfort I could. The night was far from over, and I sensed that the sharing, the true connection, had only just begun. He needed to talk, to let it out, and for some reason he had chosen me, his quiet neighbor, to be the one to listen. And I would. "She was old," Arthur finally continued, his voice raspy. 17 years. A good long life for a beagle. He managed a watery, sad smile. "Got her as a pup, just after my Martha passed." Martha. His wife, I presumed. The pieces of his quiet, solitary life were beginning to surface, painting a picture of a man who had known his share of sorrow. Bess was. She was everything. My best girl. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, his eyes pleading for understanding, or maybe just for a witness to his pain. The house, it just feels so empty now, so quiet. I couldn't just sit there, not alone. I squeezed his arm gently. You don't have to be alone, Arthur, I said. Not tonight. I poured him some more tea, though his first cup was still mostly full. The simple act felt like a lifeline, a small anchor in the sea of his grief. He gave me a grateful look, the kind that speaks more than words ever could. The fire crackled, the rain drummed on, and in the warmth of my living room, two near strangers, brought together by loss and a late-night knock, began to navigate the fragile terrain of shared sorrow. What I didn't realize then was how this night of unexpected intimacy would change not just my perception of my quiet neighbor, but my perception of myself and the possibilities for connection that still existed, even after years of quiet solitude. The unreal part wasn't just the suddenness of it all, but the profound sense of being exactly where I was supposed to be, offering a hand to someone who truly needed it. Arthur started to talk then, really talk. It was as if a dam had broken. He spoke about Bess, about her funny quirks, the way she'd greet him at the door with her whole body wagging, the way she'd snuggle up to him on the sofa in the evenings. He told me about Martha, his late wife, about their life together, about the loneliness that had settled in after she was gone, a loneliness that Bess had helped to keep at bay for so many years. His stories weren't grand or dramatic, but they were filled with the small, precious details that make up a life, the kind of details that break your heart when that life is changed forever. I listened, really listened, asking a gentle question here and there, but mostly just letting him pour out his grief and his memories. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, a somber soundtrack to his words. There was no judgment in the room, no awkwardness anymore, just a deep human connection forged in vulnerability. He wasn't just the quiet man from the Miller place anymore. He was Arthur, a man with a heart full of love and loss, just like so many of us. He described the last few days with Bess, how he knew Curtine was coming. He'd cooked her favorite meals, a little bit of chicken and rice, and had carried her outside when her old legs couldn't manage the steps anymore. He spoke of her final moments, how she'd licked his hand weakly, her tail giving just a faint thump, before she'd closed her eyes for the last time. As he recounted this, his voice choked, and he had to stop, fresh tears streaming down his face. I handed him a tissue from the box I kept on the end table, my own eyes misty. There's a unique kind of pain in losing a pet, a pure, uncomplicated grief that can be surprisingly overwhelming. It's the loss of unconditional love, of a steadfast presence. I buried her out by the old apple tree, he said after a while, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. Martha loved that tree. I thought Bess would like it there near her. The image was so poignant, this solitary man in the dark and the rain, digging a grave for his beloved companion. My heart ached for him. That's a beautiful spot, Arthur, I said quietly. A fitting resting place for a good friend. He looked around my living room then, really seeing it, I think, for the first time. His gaze lingered on the photographs on the mantelpiece. One of Tom and me, younger, smiling on a beach trip. Another of Gus, his head cocked, his eyes bright. You understand, he said, not as a question, but as a statement. You've known this kind of quiet too. It was true. The quiet of my house was often a comfort, but sometimes, especially on nights like this, it could feel vast and echoing. I do, I admitted. Losing Tom, and then Gus, it changes you. The silence can be deafening sometimes. It was strange, sharing this with him. I hadn't spoken so openly about my own grief with anyone in a long time. But with Arthur, in this unexpected sanctuary we'd created from the storm outside and the storms within, it felt natural. It felt right. We weren't just neighbor and neighbor anymore. We were two souls who understood the landscape of loss. He nodded slowly, looking into the fire, which was now burning brightly, casting a warm, steady glow. Martha used to say that memories are like embers, he murmured. Sometimes they glow warm, and sometimes they just ache, reminding you of the fire that's gone out. That was beautiful, and so true. I'd never thought of it quite like that. She sounds like she was a very wise woman, I said. A faint smile touched his lips. She was the light of my life. Bess was the afterglow, I suppose. Keeping things warm for a little longer. He sighed, a deep, shuddering breath, but it sounded less like despair and more like a letting go, a release. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, turning to me, his eyes still red-rimmed but clearer now, more focused. "Thank you for opening your door, for listening. I don't know what I would have done tonight if you hadn't." "There's no need for thanks, Arthur," I replied genuinely. "I'm glad you came. Really. Sometimes just not being alone with it is everything." He managed a small, grateful nod. The rain had softened, the drumming against the roof easing into a gentle patter. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed too, the sound softer, less jarring than before. It felt as though the night itself was calming down, mirroring the slow easing of Arthur's immediate anguish. He still looked exhausted, etched with grief, but the raw edge of his distress seemed to have dulled, replaced by a profound weariness, and perhaps a tiny flicker of peace. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind underscore of quiet now. Not empty, but filled with the residue of shared words, shared tears, and an unexpected, deeply human connection. It was in this quiet, in this newfound understanding, that something truly unreal began to take hold, not in a fantastical way, but in the simple, powerful realization of how much we truly need each other, especially in our darkest hours. The most unreal part was how quickly the walls I hadn't even fully realized I'd built around myself had started to crumble, all because of a late-night knock and a shared cup of tea. Arthur eventually fell quiet, gazing into the flames. The warmth of the fire, the soothing tea, and perhaps the sheer emotional exhaustion of the last few hours had taken their toll. His eyelids began to droop. I didn't want to send him back out into the damp night, not when he was clearly so spent, and certainly not back to that empty house, freshly filled with the ghost of his beloved Bess. "Arthur," I said softly, "you look like you're about to fall asleep right there in that chair. I have a spare room. It's modest, but it's clean and warm. Why don't you stay the night? Don't go back to an empty house tonight." He looked up, startled by the offer, his eyes wide for a moment. "Oh, no, Eleanor. I couldn't possibly impose. You've done so much already. I should be getting back." He made a move to stand, but it was a weak effort, his body clearly resisting. "Nonsense," I said gently but firmly. "It's no imposition at all. Honestly. It's the least I can do. You need to rest. And frankly," I added with a small, reassuring smile, "it'll make me feel better knowing you're not over there all alone tonight." This last part was true. The thought of him returning to that profound silence, so soon after his loss, was more than I wanted to contemplate. My offer wasn't just for him. It was for me too, a way to extend the comfort we'd found. He hesitated, looking from me to the fire, then back again. The struggle was visible on his face, his ingrained desire not to be a burden warring with his evident need for solace and rest. Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Positive," I said. "The bed's already made up. Come on." I stood and after a moment, he slowly, wearily, pushed himself up from the armchair. He looked so vulnerable standing there, a man stripped bare of his usual defenses by grief. I led him down the short hallway to the guest room. It was simple, as I'd said, with a double bed covered in a patchwork quilt my grandmother had made, a small nightstand, and a window that looked out onto the back garden, now shrouded in darkness. "The bathroom is just next door," I told him. "There are fresh towels on the rack. Please, make yourself comfortable." He stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking into the room. Then he turned to me, his expression filled with a gratitude that was deeply touching. "Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion, I don't have the words. Thank you for everything." "Get some sleep, Arthur," I said softly. "We can talk more in the morning if you like, or not. Whatever you need." He nodded, a small, tired smile gracing his lips. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Arthur." I pulled the door almost closed, leaving it just a crack ajar, a habit from when my own children were small, a silent signal that I was nearby if needed. Back in the living room, I sank into my own armchair, the one opposite where Arthur had been sitting. The fire was still glowing, casting a gentle light on the 2 mugs on the coffee table. The house felt different. The silence was still there, but it was a companionable silence now, not an empty one. It was as if Arthur's presence, his shared grief, had somehow filled the spaces that had felt hollow for so long. I thought about the unexpected turn the evening had taken. A few hours ago, he was just the quiet neighbor, a figure at the periphery of my solitary life. Now we had shared something profound, something deeply human. It was unreal. In a way, how quickly barriers could fall, how connection could blossom in the most unexpected circumstances. I didn't feel like reading anymore. My mind was replaying the conversation, Arthur's stories, the raw pain in his eyes, and the quiet courage it took for him to reach out. I felt a sense of privilege, almost that he had chosen my door to knock on. It made me realize how much I, too, had perhaps been craving a genuine connection, a break from my own well-worn routines of solitude. This wasn't just about me helping him. It was about 2 people finding a moment of solace together. As I finally rose to bank the fire for the night, a sense of peace settled over me, a peace I hadn't felt in a very long time. The rain had stopped completely. Outside, the world was washed clean, and I had a feeling that something within me had been gently cleansed as well. The night had been about loss, yes, but it had also been about the unexpected gift of human kindness and the quiet miracle of one heart reaching out to another in the dark. And that, I thought, was the most unreal and the most beautiful part of it all. I went to bed feeling a sense of quiet anticipation for the morning, wondering what this new, fragile connection might bring.